I'd like to make a comment on Shane Gibbs' latest video, which he has titled Accept, Adapt and Overcome. This is not me having a go, by the way, or trying to create division. Now, Shane did a great job galvanising people to attend the recent TI rally outside the BBC headquarters in London on the 29th of August. And he made an excellent choice of having Mark Williams use the loudhailer to speak to the public in an articulate and lucid way on a subject that is not an easy one for the public to understand or accept, probably because they refuse to believe these extrajudicial operations are being carried out on many ordinary people and with the collusion of the police, among other organisations. They will also find it difficult to take in the technology that is in use to stalk, harass and watch us. I'll play back the segment I wish you to watch and which I'll comment on. It's not much more than a minute long, so even those with a very short attention span can, I'm sure, manage it.
Any person that can help you, and I've said this many times, is you. You will become your own worst enemy if you start listening to the shit that they put through people's fucking minds, if you start listening to the shit that people might be repeating out in public. You need to turn off your radar. They have got you sensitised. It's like a big radar. Your ears are like radar dishes. Oh, they're talking about me. Oh, they're talking. Fucking drop it. The more attention you pay them, the more they will require from you. Surely that doesn't take a lot of working out. I cannot be the only one that has worked out the fact that they are bidding for your attention by doing this shit to you, by hurting you, by harming you, by destroying your property, by destroying your social circles, by destroying every aspect of your life that they possibly can.
By his own admission, Shane has said that since moving from his previous address in Ashford, Kent, to the current one on the coast of Essex, his gangstalking has diminished considerably, and he now has a job. So I really commend him for still managing to post his YouTube videos and offer support for anyone that needs it, or at least those he feels would benefit from his advice. I do agree mostly with what Shane says in this video. Don't react to those expecting a reaction, and do try to get on with your life as best as you can. Where I differ is evidence acquisition. Shane makes no mention of this. I would say if there is a way for you to obtain credible evidence, and I do mean credible, then go for it. Sticking your mobile phone in someone's face and calling them a gangstalker is not credible. Pointing your mobile at red, white, blue and black cars and stating that the drivers are gangstalking you is sufficient ammo for you to be labelled as delusional. Even if you do acquire credible evidence, don't expect the police or others to accept it. Their whole agenda, particularly the police, is to pretend these operations are just a figment of your imagination and have you labelled as a nut job and have that ratified by a shrink. If your evidence is good, then it's good. When the time comes where this illegal program is finally exposed, you can then have your evidence looked at without prejudice and bias. I don't recall Shane ever mentioning being targeted with any of the horrors that other targets have claimed is used against them. Technology is used in our tracking and surveillance, but the particular tech I'm referring to here delivers its payload invisibly and silently, or almost silently, and that is why such weapons are a true horror. These weapons are real. The technology has been around for decades and has no doubt been refined in many ways in the intervening years, and making them portable would be one of those refinements. One such technology, horror, is a device that has a few names: the voice of God, voice to skull, and V2K. The public may have first heard about this technology when it was allegedly used on Iraqi soldiers during the Gulf War in 1991. The so-called voice of God weapon had, allegedly, Iraqi soldiers believe Allah was speaking to them and commanding them to put their weapons down. This could be an urban myth, or it might have happened. I wasn't there, so cannot confirm or deny the validity of these claims. There was an item a number of years ago on a local London news programme where this technology was actually demonstrated, and in a library. A guy with his voice to skull device stood on the first floor, and a London-based journalist stood next to him as he pointed his device at unsuspecting library patrons. He spoke into the device, and it was obvious that only the person targeted could hear what was being said. This was a real-time demo of this technology, and it was some years ago. I contacted ITV London recently to inquire whether they had this news segment in their archives, but they never replied. And I do think it was ITV rather than BBC, and I haven't contacted BBC. This device simulates one of the symptoms experienced by those diagnosed with schizophrenia. If such devices are being used on some people selected as lab rats of this stalking and harassment program, then would you not deem that as sadistic and horrific? I've been fortunate so far not to have been on the receiving end of the V2K technology, though I do have a few questions regarding this tech, and one question is, can the sound travel through solid objects such as walls? And the second question is, can it track people on the move, or does the unwitting victim or target need to be stationary? So to sum up, for the many people unaware of the advances in what I will name as horror technology, the voice to skull devices are in operation and have been available and perhaps allowed to be placed in the wrong hands for many years, as have other horrors. Which leads me on to the class of weapon categorised under the umbrella of directed energy weapons. Whether microwave, electromagnetic, or any other sinister tech, such weapons can harm invisibly, passing their malignant payload through solid materials. In some of my YouTube videos, I've said I learnt about these extrajudicial operations in late 2012, some 3 or more years after I believe the program began. If I didn't say in those videos what caused me to do some searching online, which led to my learning and having my eyes opened to our deeper state, then I will do now. And bear in mind, this was at least 3 years into my targeting. During the night, as I tried to sleep, I would hear a very quiet pulsing sound, and sometimes this sound also had a vibration effect on my body. It creeped me out. If I moved to different parts of the flat to sleep, I would still hear the quiet and all ever-present pulsing. This became a regular nightly occurrence. My then neighbours living in the flat below had waged a noise campaign from day one of their moving in back in 2009. My sleep was targeted through the night, and the tenant, Daniel Mesfin, and his accomplices seemed to have an unnerving ability of knowing where I was in the flat, and would bang under wherever I was, as well as slam doors with a vengeance regularly and for no apparent reason. Some months after becoming aware of this pulsing, my body began to get aches and pains and burning. I also developed veins on my feet and legs and the side of my head, and the only explanation for this, as far as I could rationalise, was that pulsing sound.
He's looking for somebody who's going to be bold, who's going to take risks. I think if you stand back at that point, then you're letting yourself down. The other good thing.
My then neighbour was without doubt a gangstalking neighbour, and it's my contention he was deliberately moved in order to fuck with me. Obviously he had been provided with, shall we say, tools or aids to help in the daily and nightly harassment, but who armed him? I cannot prove the harassment or what was used other than noise to interfere with my daily life. But as many targets have talked about electronic harassment, I am going to make an educated guess that I was, and possibly still am, on the receiving end of this horror hardware. So for those of us experiencing the worst and more sinister elements of this program, perhaps Shane should try to understand why it is so difficult to adapt and ignore, particularly if he wasn't on the receiving end and never has been on the receiving end of any of these more sinister technologies. In an ideal world, and I know we don't live in a utopian society, both Daniel Mesfin and Negash Teshomi, as well as Nagash's wife and kids, would take lie detector tests and be tried in a court of justice for their roles in this program. I would also want the local police in Peckham, those responsible for my Merlin report, to explain why they omitted to mention the audio files that were mainly recordings of Nagash Teshomi and his family, which were included in the memory card I gave them, along with video files and Word documents to use alongside the audio and video files. The police's agenda of deliberately labelling a false diagnosis of my being delusional and their omission of the audio files and making false claims about my video files will prove they are colluding in the organised stalking and harassment program.